Amara grew up in Lusanda, a small village in Malawi, where everyone seemed to know each other like family. But inside her own home, she never truly felt like she belonged. After losing her parents at a young age, she was taken in by her Aunt Chikondi. To outsiders, it might have looked like an act of kindness, but to Amara, it became a daily reminder that she was not real family. Those words, spoken by her aunt again and again, cut deeper than any wound. Chikondi never missed a chance to remind Amara of her place. At family gatherings, while the cousins laughed and played, Amara was asked to serve food or clean up, never invited to sit at the table. When gifts were handed out, she often received nothing, as if she were invisible. Even the simplest gestures of love, an embrace, a kind word, a motherly smile, were denied to her. The message was always clear. She was an outsider living under their roof, tolerated but not cherished. As a child, Amara would lie awake at night wondering what she had done wrong, why she was never enough to be loved like the others. She longed to hear her aunt call her daughter, but instead she heard whispers that she didn't belong. Each rejection piled on the last, building a wall of silence and pain inside her. Yet behind her quiet eyes, a small spark remained, the hope that one day she might find a place where she was truly wanted. Amara grew older carrying that quiet ache in her heart, but instead of giving up, she tried harder and harder to prove that she was worthy of love. Every morning she woke before the others, sweeping the yard, fetching water, and making sure her younger cousins had their clothes ready for school. She learned to cook meals, to wash clothes by hand, to take on every chore without complaint. At school, she worked twice as hard as anyone else. While other children laughed and played, Amara kept her head buried in books, determined to show that she was not a burden but someone who could shine. Her teachers noticed. They praised her intelligence, the way she led group work, the way she always helped classmates who struggled. Sometimes, neighbors would whisper about how smart and hardworking she was, saying, "That girl has a bright future." Amara would smile politely, but inside she wished her aunt could see her the same way. She hoped that if she was useful enough, obedient enough, excellent enough, her aunt would finally soften and call her family. But Chikondi's heart remained hard. No matter what Amara did, it was never enough. In fact, the more Amara excelled, the more her aunt seemed determined to remind her of her place. She would scold Amara in front of relatives, accusing her of showing off. When neighbors complimented Amara, Chikondi would laugh bitterly and say, "Don't waste your praise. She is not my blood. She means nothing to me." The words cut like a knife, especially because they were said in front of everyone. The day those exact words left her aunt's lips, the whole village seemed to stop and listen. People gasped, some shaking their heads in shame, others too afraid to speak. Amara stood frozen, her face burning, her heart breaking into pieces she didn't know how to gather. She wanted the ground to swallow her whole. But she stood there, silent, with tears stinging her eyes, knowing that no amount of kindness or success could change how her aunt saw her. That moment became unforgettable. The humiliation spread quickly through Lusanda, whispered from house to house like wildfire. Children repeated it in the playground, adults murmured about it at the market. Amara's pain was no longer private. It had been thrown into the open for everyone to see. And yet, even in the midst of that public rejection, she did not fight back. She lowered her head, carried her chores, and returned to her books. Deep down, she still carried that spark of hope, though now it flickered weakly. She wondered if proving herself was even possible, if love had to be earned, or if it would always be denied to her. What Amara did not know then was that this wound, as cruel as it was shaping her into someone far stronger than anyone could imagine. Amara carried her aunt's words like a heavy stone in her chest, but she refused to let them crush her. Instead of growing bitter, she learned to turn her pain into quiet strength. At home she was still treated as the outsider, but at school she began to carve out a place where she could breathe. She discovered that even if her aunt never gave her kindness, she could choose to give it to others. She started small. When her classmates forgot their pencils, Amara would share hers. If someone was too shy to read aloud, she would encourage them gently. She never mocked or laughed at mistakes the way other children sometimes. Her compassion stood out, and soon, many of the younger students looked up to her. She became the girl they ran to when they scraped a knee or couldn't solve a problem. In her presence, others felt safe. Helping children gave Amara a kind of healing she couldn't find at home. Their little smiles reminded her that she still had love to give, even if she was denied it in her own family. Teachers noticed the way she cared for others and often asked her to help mentor the younger classes. It became her refuge, the place where she felt she belonged, the place where her heart could be seen. At night, after long days of chores and studying, she would lie in bed replaying the cruel words her aunt had thrown at her. But instead of letting the memories poison her, she told herself that she would never treat anyone the way she had been treated. She promised that if she ever had a family of her own, No child would feel unwanted under her roof. That promise became her silent shield, protecting her from despair. Her resilience didn't mean she never felt the sting of rejection. There were nights when she cried quietly into her pillow, her body shaking with grief she couldn't share with anyone. But in the morning she would rise again, carry water, cook meals, go to school, and help others as if nothing was wrong. People began to notice her calmness, her ability to endure without lashing out. Some even whispered that Amara carried a wisdom far beyond her years. What no one knew was that this strength, built in silence, would one day be tested in a way no one could predict. The kindness she gave so freely, the patience she carried, and the love she offered even when she was denied it, these qualities were not just survival tools. They were seeds being planted in her heart, waiting for the moment when they would bloom into something greater. Amara had no idea that the very love she was deprived of would become her greatest weapon. She only knew that even in the face of rejection, she refused to let her spirit be broken. And that choice, quiet and unseen, was shaping her into someone extraordinary. Years passed, and the once strong and commanding Aunt Chikondi began to change. At first it was small, complaints of constant fatigue, swelling in her legs, pain that would not go away. The family thought it was just age catching up with her, but soon the truth became undeniable. Chikondi was diagnosed with kidney failure. Suddenly, the woman who had always carried herself with pride, who spoke with authority and looked down on others, was now weak and dependent on doctors, nurses, and endless hospital visits. The family panicked. They rushed to hospitals in Lusaka and Blantyre, praying for good news, but the doctors said the same thing everywhere: she needed a transplant. Without it, her chances of survival were slim. The entire household turned upside down. Cousins, uncles, and relatives came forward to be tested. Everyone hoped they would be the one to save her. One by one, the results came back, no match. Each test was like another blow, another reminder that time was running out. Days turned into weeks, and desperation filled the air. Chikondi, once the proud center of the family, now lay frail in a hospital bed, her body hooked to machines that could only keep her alive temporarily. Relatives whispered in the hallways, some crying, others arguing about what to do. The once loud and unshakable woman was now reduced to silence, her eyes hollow, her body trembling with weakness. Then came the moment no one expected. The doctors gathered the family and explained the results. Only one person in the household had the right blood type and could be a potential donor. It wasn't her children. It wasn't her siblings. It wasn't anyone she had called real family. The only match was Amara, the girl she had rejected, humiliated, and called nothing. The room went silent. Faces turned, all eyes landing on Amara. Some were shocked, others ashamed. Even the cousins who had grown up watching their mother insult her were left speechless. The irony was too heavy to ignore. The aunt who had spent years telling Amara she was not family now depended entirely on her to live. For Amara, it was a moment that felt unreal. She had carried the scars of her aunt's cruelty all her life, but now she was the only one who could save her. The weight of that truth pressed down on her heart. Neighbors soon heard the news, and it spread quickly, just like the cruel words years ago. People whispered in markets and churches. "Did you hear? Only Amara can save Chikondi. The outsider is the only hope." It was the kind of twist that no one could have written better. A family that had excluded her now looked at her with pleading eyes. A village that had once pitied her now watched closely, waiting to see what she would do. And as Chikondi lay weak and helpless, the power had shifted. For the first time, Amara held the choice, and the entire family's future rested on her answer. Chikondi had always been the loudest voice in the room, the one people feared, the one whose words carried weight. But sickness had stripped all that away. The proud woman who once stood tall now moved slowly, her back bent, her eyes sunken with pain. She could no longer command respect with her voice. Instead, she was the one being pitied, the one being watched with a mix of sadness and curiosity. And in her weakness, she was finally forced to face the person she had pushed aside all her life. It happened one late afternoon when Amara returned from school. She walked into the yard and found her aunt waiting, sitting on a low stool, her hands trembling as she tried to steady herself. For a moment, Amara thought she was seeing someone else. Chikondi's face, once sharp with anger, was now soft and desperate. Her lips quivered as she tried to speak, but no words came at first. Then, in a voice so broken it barely carried, she said, "Amara, please, save me. You're my only family." The words hit harder than any insult ever had. For years, Amara had heard the opposite. "You are not my blood, you mean nothing to me." And now, with neighbors standing at their gates, cousins peeking from behind doors, and villagers quietly gathering to witness the scene, Chikondi was saying the exact words she had always refused to admit. The irony was so sharp it seemed to hang in the air, cutting through the silence of everyone watching. Some of the neighbors whispered, shaking their heads. She used to call that girl nothing, one said. And now she calls her family. Others stood quietly, waiting to see how Amara would respond. Even the relatives who had once joined in humiliating her now looked at her with pleading eyes, as if her answer could hold the power to redeem them all. Chikandi reached out her hands, her voice breaking, her pride gone. I know I hurt you. I know I said things that cannot be taken back. But please, Amara, forgive me. I am begging you. Her tears fell freely, landing on the dusty ground. The woman who had once mocked Amara in public was now humiliating herself in front of the same community, her desperation leaving no space for pride. Amara stood there, frozen, her heart pounding. All the years of cruelty came flooding back. The words, the exclusion, the pain of being treated as a stranger under her own roof. And now this same woman, the one who had denied her love, was on her knees, asking for her life. The crowd waited for Amara's answer, the weight of silence pressing on every soul present. In that moment, the roles had reversed completely. The aunt who had once held power now had nothing left, and the girl who had been dismissed as nothing stood as the only hope. The entire village could see it. Life had written a story no one would ever forget. Amara stood still, her aunt's broken voice echoing in her ears. Please save me. You're my only family. The words should have warmed her heart, but instead they stirred up a storm inside her. She wanted to believe them, but how could she, after years of being told the exact opposite? Her chest felt heavy, like two sides of her soul were pulling her in different directions. On one side was her heart, soft and compassionate, whispering that she could not let someone die when she had the power to save them. On the other side was her memory, raw and sharp, reminding her of every wound Chikandi had ever inflicted. Images flashed quickly in her mind, like painful scenes from a movie she could not pause. She saw herself as a little girl standing outside in the cold while her cousins gathered inside, laughing around a meal she wasn't invited to share. She remembered birthdays where she watched others receive gifts, while her hands stayed empty. She heard again the cruel laughter when her aunt told neighbors, "She is not my blood. She means nothing to me." Each memory was like a knife, cutting deeper into the scars she had carried all her life. And now, standing before the same woman who had carved those wounds, Amara was being asked to forget them all in a single moment. Her aunt's life was in her hands, but so was her dignity, her childhood, and her pain. The villagers held their breath. They knew the history. They had heard the insults, seen the humiliations. Some of them had even repeated Chikandi's words behind closed doors. Now they watched Amara with wide eyes, waiting. Would she walk away and let justice take its course? Or would she do the unthinkable, save the very person who had spent years destroying her spirit? Amara's heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She looked at her aunt, now frail and begging, and felt a strange mix of pity and anger. Pity, because this woman was broken and afraid of death. Anger, because it had taken the shadow of death to force her to admit what Amara had always longed to hear, that she was family. Tears stung Amara's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wanted to scream, to ask her aunt why she had been so cruel, why she had denied her love when she needed it most. But her voice would not come. Instead, she stood in silence, trapped in the war between her past and her present. The crowd leaned closer, whispering, waiting, almost holding their breath. Amara's choice would not just decide her aunt's future. It would reveal the kind of woman she had become after everything. Would she allow her bitterness to rule her, or would she rise above the years of pain? The question hung in the air, heavy and unforgettable. And no one, not even Amara herself, knew what her answer would be. The air was so heavy that even the birds in the trees seemed to fall silent. All eyes were on Amara, waiting for her to speak. Her aunt's words still hung in the air, desperate and trembling. Please save me. You're my only family. Everyone expected anger. They expected her to shout, to pour out all the pain that had been bottled inside her for so many years. Some even thought she might turn her back and walk away. But Amara surprised them all. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. Instead, she lifted her head, looked straight at her aunt, and spoke with a calm strength that made the entire yard freeze. Family isn't about blood, she said softly, her words clear enough for everyone to hear. It's about love, and you never treated me as family. The moment was electric. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Relatives lowered their eyes. Even the children, who didn't fully understand, could sense the weight of what had just been spoken. It was a truth so sharp it pierced the pride of everyone who had ever joined in rejecting. For the first time, Chikandi had no answer. The woman who always had something to say, some insult ready on her tongue, could only sit in silence, trembling under the truth of her niece's words. Amara did not gloat. She did not smile with triumph. There was no trace of hatred in her voice, only a calm dignity that came from years of surviving pain and choosing not to let it destroy her. In that moment, she was no longer the quiet, unwanted girl standing in the shadows. She was a woman who knew her worth, and the entire village saw it. A hush fell over the crowd. The silence was so deep it felt like the earth itself was listening. Some people had tears in their eyes, not because of anger or sorrow, but because they had just witnessed something greater than revenge. They saw a young woman who had every reason to strike back, yet chose to stand with grace. Chikandi broke down completely. Her face crumpled, and she began to sob, her hands shaking as she covered her face. The pride that had carried her for so long dissolved into shame. She had no weapons left, no words to hide behind. Her cruelty had been answered not with more cruelty, but with dignity, and that was a punishment more powerful than any insult could ever be. Amara stood still, her heart steady, her spirit unbroken. She had spoken the truth she had carried for years, and now it was out in the open for all to hear. The villagers knew they would never forget this moment. They had seen something rare, something powerful. A girl once treated as nothing, proving herself greater than hatred. And though Amara had not yet said what she would do, one thing was already clear. Whatever choice she made, she had already won. The village held its breath for days, waiting to hear what Amara would decide. Rumors flew from door to door, some saying she would refuse, others insisting she was too kind to turn her back. But Amara kept silent, carrying the decision quietly in her heart. She knew it wasn't just about her aunt's life. It was about her own healing, her own dignity. And when she finally spoke, she shocked everyone again. "I will do it," she said simply, "but not for her. I'm doing it for me, to show that my heart is stronger than the hate I was given." The words spread through Lusanda like wildfire. People whispered them in the markets, repeated them in the churches, told them to strangers as if retelling a story that already felt legendary. Everyone wanted to see how this would end. The girl once called nothing, now walking into the hospital as the only hope for the very woman who had rejected her. The day of the surgery arrived. The hospital corridors were tense, filled with worried relatives and curious neighbors who had come to witness history. Amara lay quietly on the bed, her face calm but her hands clasped tightly together. Nurses moved around preparing her, and doctors explained the risks, but her heart was already steady. She had made her choice. In another room, Chikandi lay trembling. The reality hit her with full force. Her life was resting in the hands of the girl she had called an outsider all her life. Shame weighed heavier than her illness. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered to herself, "How can she love me after everything I did to her?" The proud woman was now small, broken, and drowning in guilt. When the time came, the two women were wheeled into the operating theater. Relatives held hands in the waiting room, whispering prayers. The whole village seemed to pause, waiting for news. Hours dragged on like years. Finally, the doctors emerged, pulling down their masks. "The surgery was successful," they announced. "Both are safe." Relief flooded the room. Some cried, some clapped. Others simply bowed their heads in silence. But the story was far from over. When Amara was brought back to her ward, weak but alive, the family gathered around her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. She was the center, the one everyone looked to with respect, awe, and even fear. And when Chikandi was wheeled in later, her eyes met Amara's. She couldn't hold the gaze for long. Overwhelmed with shame, she broke down in front of everyone. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice cracking. "After all the cruelty, after all the hurt, you still saved me." The crowd was silent, moved to tears. The irony, the beauty, the weight of it all struck deep. Amara hadn't saved her aunt to gain her approval or to prove her worth. She had done it to stay true to herself, to rise above hatred, to choose love even when it wasn't given to her. And in that hospital room, filled with raw emotion, it was clear to everyone, Amara's heart was the strongest of them all. When the surgery was over and both Amara and Chikandi began to recover, it felt like the air in the village had shifted. Something deep had changed. Chikandi, once the proud woman who never admitted fault, now carried herself differently. The sickness had humbled her body, but Amara's act of love had humbled her soul. She could no longer hide behind pride or harsh words. Every time she looked at Amara lying weak in her hospital bed, her heart twisted with guilt. For nights she could not sleep. The memory of all the cruel words she had spoken replayed in her mind. "You are not my blood. You mean nothing to me." Now those words burned her with shame. The same girl she had rejected had nearly given her life to save her. The weight of it was unbearable, and Chikandi knew she could not stay silent anymore. When they returned home after the hospital, the family gathered in the yard, as neighbors and relatives often did. People came to visit, to see for themselves if the story they had heard was true. Chikandi stood slowly, leaning on her walking stick, her voice trembling as she called everyone's attention. For the first time, she did not sound like the commanding aunt they all remembered. She sounded broken but honest. "I need to confess," she began, her eyes wet with tears. "All my life I told Amara she was not family. I pushed her aside, I humiliated her, I denied her love. I was cruel and I was wrong. She should have hated me, but instead she saved me. Her voice broke, and she covered her face with her hands, sobbing openly. I don't deserve her kindness, but I beg her forgiveness. The yard was silent. No one could believe what they were hearing. This was the same woman who had once laughed at the idea of Amara belonging. And now she was crying in front of everyone, admitting her cruelty without excuse. The villagers were moved to tears, some nodding, others wiping their eyes. It was a moment that felt bigger than words. Amara, still weak but standing tall, looked at her aunt. She didn't rush to embrace her, but she nodded slowly, her calm presence radiating strength. In that moment, everyone could see the truth. Amara was the true heart of the family. Not because of blood, but because of the love and dignity she had shown when it mattered most. From that day on, things were different. Relatives who once overlooked her now treated her with respect. Neighbors greeted her with admiration. Children in the village whispered her name like she was a hero. And Chikondi, forever changed, never missed a chance to remind people of what Amara had done. She saved me, she would say, her voice heavy with gratitude. When I called her nothing, she gave me everything. The wound of rejection that had marked Amara's childhood was now replaced with honor. She had not only healed her aunt's body, but also transformed her family's heart. And in doing so, she became a symbol of true love, stronger than blood, stronger than hate. Amara's story did not end in the hospital or even in her village. What she lived through became something bigger, something that touched hearts far beyond Lusanda. People who heard it carried the message with them, retelling it again and again. The girl who was rejected became the one who saved. Amara herself found a new purpose. She knew her pain had not been wasted. She turned it into hope for others, starting a small organization for children who felt unwanted or abandoned, just as she once had. She wanted them to know that their worth did not depend on blood or approval, but on the love they carried inside. What began as a small effort in her village grew, with neighbors volunteering, teachers supporting, and strangers donating. Soon, her story was inspiring children across Malawi, reminding them that rejection does not define them. Chikondi, meanwhile, lived with a softened heart. The proud woman who once looked down on Amara now introduced her to everyone with tears in her eyes. She saved me, she would say. When I called her nothing, she gave me everything. Those words never failed to silence a room. People saw not only Amara's strength, but also Chikondi's transformation, proof that even the hardest hearts can change. And Amara's own voice became the closing message that spread like fire. Blood may connect us, but it is love that defines family. Those words carried weight because they were born of wounds, forgiveness, and grace. They left people in tears, not only for Amara's story, but because they saw their own families reflected in it. In the end, her life became a reminder to the world that true family is chosen not by blood, but by love.